So I want to get into this by placing the idea of practices of faith into a larger context of the Christian life, and a little bit into the history of the Christian life. You'll remember when Christianity started, Christians were first called people of the way. And that was a description, it was a way of life, a way of living that stood apart in some ways from the larger culture. Only slowly did they begin to develop any sense of theology. First, what they were doing is they were taking the stories of Jesus, the stories of the apostles, and the early disciples, beginning to reflect on what had happened in the crucifixion and how had Jesus been resurrected, and what are we to make of this Savior who was crucified on a cross. And slowly they were putting together maybe collections of some of the teachings of Jesus, and certainly the writings of Paul, which were the earliest writings of the church. And then by about 700 AD, sometime around there, 7200 AD, CE, they began to put together some gospels. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mark are first. Later, we have the Gospel of Luke, probably sometime before 100 CE, maybe around 100 CE or after to 120 CE. You have the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of John coming along.
What happened to Thomas's gospel?
Thomas was not discovered until later, and it was considered heresy, so it was left out by the early church when they, in the 4th century, they started forming the books that would make their way into what we now have as the Bible.
Wasn't really talked about for centuries and centuries.
The Gospel of Thomas was pretty early written, but it was Gnostic. And Gnosticism was rejected by the church. And in fact, the Gospel of John almost got left out because it was thought as too Gnostic. And the book of Revelation was the last book to be included. But there are other Gospels too that we've discovered in the 19th.
Well, I just looked it up.
Yeah.
I'm trying to Google things on the side here.
Yeah.
This Gospel of Thomas and the Gnostic Gospels somehow were buried and found in an Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi in 1945.
So it wasn't until the 20th century that they were found and
Were these the
discovered.
fun things that were found in the big basins?
Yes, and
Have
caves.
you ever heard of, someone I've had a crush on for ages is Elaine Pagels.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
she writes about the night. It's a great book. We got to come back to that.
Yeah, we could read her books
And
all day.
look at the book of the Elaine Pagel. She finds value in them. There's dangers in them. There's good things that we jettison, some things we avoided. They had a rather body spirit split, many Gnostics, which did honor the body. And the body is a shell containing, some of these Gnostics thought the real thing was just the soul, the spirit, and it's going to be released from this oppressive body one day. And the church were largely rejected that because they said the body is important. The Jewish view, the body and spirit and soul and mind, everything is one. So anyway, I digress again. But anyway, only slowly does the church evolve. At first, it was, in the larger sense of the word, charismatic church. It was a charismatic movement with charismatic leaders that they depended and looked to. But those leaders died. The apostles and Paul, and then this next generation died. And then charismatic movements always reach a place where they need to be more institutionalized. So it became more institutionalized. And as it became institutionalized, they wanted to start bringing the churches that were scattered throughout, who had very diverse views of things, into orthodoxy. So they began to fight over orthodoxy. We had Christians in riots killing other Christians. And there's a wonderful book called, I'll have to get the exact name of it. I'll recommend to you, written by a Jewish fellow about the early church. It's very powerful about the history of this and beautifully written. And these early Christians, only when they got into the councils, which were brought together as Constantine began to improve Christianity as eventually it became the religion after Constantine, but Constantine made it the main religion of the Roman Empire as a political of uniting his people and someone who probably legitimately shared the faith. So by then you get the councils that form the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed and the great creeds, and then a lot of focus becomes on belief. That was carried through the Middle Ages. And something was lost about this sense that the Christian life is about about our walk with God, a way of life that is set apart and defined by practices that we have that maintain and build that way of faith. Now in our time, we're beginning to realize that we've lost something by focusing. Being Christian is all about having the right set of beliefs, and if you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you know, that's you're going to have. Well, that's partly true, isn't it? It's for us. It is true that acceptance of Jesus, acceptance of his way, but it forgets that a lot of it belittles the really part of living the faith. So more and more, I think mainline church is saying, we don't really want to jettison beliefs. Beliefs are critical. I like to think of it as a path that we walk along the way of good Christian life, that we have practices that we live for the living of the faith. That's the essence of the Christian life. But belief is also very important, because there are a lot of paths that can lead you astray. I mean, the evangelicals are completely wrong about this. They're kind of narrow in it oftentimes, but they're not wrong. There are ways that are really not of the faith, or that are not as helpful, that can be misguiding. So, and we see some of that happening in the church today. So beliefs are kind of the signpost to keep you on one of the viable paths. There may be a lot of viable paths that you walk, but there are unviable ones, because, you know, now we see the mirror dimly. One day we shall see face to face. We don't have clear knowledge. Therefore, we have to have a bit of humility about how we approach things. So that's a set of the context. The heart of Christianity is just walk the way. There are many ways of practice that the church has traditionally practiced. I mean, prayer, fasting are two that come to mind very quickly. Barbara Brown Taylor in her book really gets into some of the traditional ways, but thinks about them and names them in different ways, and some of the ways that maybe we haven't even thought of. The care of the body is one of them. That's in her book. And it's an excellent way of thinking. Saying yes and saying no. I preached a sermon recently on that. That's in the book. So I want to suggest that any of these ways, if you commit yourself to them and you go deep enough into them, will be transformative to your whole Christian life, and may very well help you learn something from the other ways. It's like when you take any Christian virtue seriously, you will find yourself being able to go deeper into your faith. You take the prayer practice of meditation and then prayer. I hold them as two very closely related but separate things. But you to do both prayer and meditation, you will find that it leads you in a closer relationship to God through Christ. So, so I want to take this first one. This first one is the practice of waking up to God. It's chapter 1 of the book.
Vision.
The vision. Yeah.
There's a subtitle to each chapter.
Subject. It's having a vision. And I want to talk about what happened to her. She talks about going to Hawaii, the Big Island, and doing some exploration. She takes a hike that she takes, and I'm going to read to you what happens on a hike to her. On the Big Island, Hawaii, I could feel the adolescent energy of the lava rocks under my feet. The spirit of that land was ebullient, unrefined, entirely pleased with itself. Its divinity had not yet suffered from the imposition of the shopping malls, beach homes, or luxury hotels. I caught its youthfulness and walked further that day than I thought I could, ending up at a small tidal pool on the far southwest tip of the island. After the crushing waves, the sanctuary of the still pool hit me with the sound of sheer silence. The calm waters lay so green and cool before me that it calmed me too. Nothing stirred the face of the water, save the breeze coming off the ocean, which caused it to wrinkle from time to time. Walking around the pool, I came to 3 stones set upright near the edge of the water, where the water was deepest. All 3 were shaped like fat baked baguettes, with the tallest one in the middle. The 2 were set snug against it, the same gray color as humpback whales. Altogether, they announced that something significant had happened in that place. I was not the first person to be affected by it. Whatever had come before me had set up an altar. And though I might not ever know what that person had encountered there, I knew the name of that place. It was Bethel, the house of God. At least that's what Jacob called that place when he encountered the God on a gorgeous island, but a rock of wilderness, something that changed his life forever. We're going to come back to Jacob. What do you, when you hear that story, what do you hear? When you hear it talk, what happened to her? What do you make of it?
For me, God is in nature.
Right, and she kind of, at first it sounds like she's immediately contradicting herself. This is new, it's unspoiled. No, the shopping malls haven't gotten
Right.
here yet, but I'm not the first person here.
Right.
Someone was here before, someone has experienced this, somebody
Yes.
made this place.
Something
And
powerful.
there's a relationship. Without, you don't know who that person is, but there's a relationship there.
Yeah, she doesn't say what was here, she says who was here before. It was a somebody.
It's
And I
like
agree
the
with-
immensity of it all, and here I am.
Right. Well, she goes on, she now goes and connects this with a biblical story. She's very good at bringing in the best and the most powerful biblical stories into her writing. She does this in this chapter and the next chapter. I mean, 2 of my favorite stories to preach on are in this chapter and the next, and this one is the story of Jacob. Remember the story of Jacob? Jacob
And his twin.
and his twin,
Mhm.
Esau.
So, yeah.
And she connects to what happened to Jacob in the wilderness. That was, I would say, I don't want to say more profound, but for Jacob, definitely, probably more life-changing than even this one was for her. And I want to share with you a little bit of that.
You want to read along, we're gonna tell everybody what we
Okay.
got. Anyone who's got the book on you,
Page what?
we'll tell you.
It's page 4.
Page
I'm
4.
gonna bring the writing is kind of in here.
Or if someone else wants, if you want to tell somebody else to read a certain paragraph.
Let me read the first one, which is just one paragraph this time.
Page 4.
Page 4. Sitting in my, oh, no, wait a second.
Sitting next. That comes through.
Yeah,
On page 3.
page 3. At least that's what Jacob called the place where he encountered God. Not on a gorgeous island, but a rocky wilderness where he saw something that changed his life forever. The first time I read Jacob's story in the Bible, I knew it was true whether it ever happened or not. There he was, still a young man, running away from home because his whole screwy family had finally imploded. Yeah, his father was dying, and he and his brother Esau had both wanted their father's blessing. Jacob's mother had colluded with him to get it, and through his scheme, it worked. It enraged his brother to the point that Jacob fled for his life. He and his brother were not identical twins, obviously. Esau could squash him like a bug, but Jacob left with little more than the clothes on his back. And when he had walked as far as he could, he looked around for a stone that he could use for a pillow. And when he had found the right stone, Jacob lay down to sleep, turning his cheek on the stone that was still warm from the sun. Maybe the dream was in the stone. Maybe it fell out of the sky. Wherever the dream came from, it was vivid. A ladder set up on the earth, with the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God ascending and descending it like bright winged ants. Then all of a sudden, God was there beside Jacob, without a single trumpet of warning, promise him safety, children, land. Remember, I am with you. God said to him, I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. And Jacob woke up while God's breath was still stirring in the air. Although he saw nothing out of the ordinary around him, the same wilderness, the same rocks, the same sand. If someone had held a mirror in front of his face, Jacob would not have seen anything different there either, except for the circles of surprise of his eyes. Surely the Lord is in this place, he said out loud, and I did not know it. How awesome is this place, he went on. There is nothing other than the house of God. This is the gate to heaven. It was one of those dreams that he could not have made up. It was one of those dreams that is so much more than real, than ordinary, passing for real, that trying to figure out what really happened involves a complete redefinition of the term. What is really real? Wow, I think I've read the whole book. That's probably the most powerful section. So I wanted to read it to you in detail. But I wanted to look at some questions that this raises up and have us have a time to do some discussion about this whole idea that she's bringing up in this chapter. She makes a point of saying how in our church, she goes on after this and she makes a point of talking about how in our churches we forget that the whole world is a sanctuary of God. God is not just found in four walls of church. She says we want something more. All the good things that happen in church, she's not downplaying church, not downplaying the importance of it, but that God is not contained in church. We need something more from that. And in chapter 5, on page 5, she writes, still some of us were not satisfied with our weekly, bi-weekly encounters with God. We wanted more than a set worship service or church work could offer. We wanted more than planning scavenger hunts for the youth group, more than polishing the silver with the altar guild, more than serving on the outreach committee or rehearsing anthems with the choir. We wanted capital more. We wanted a deeper sense of purpose. We wanted a stronger sense of God's presence. We wanted a more reliable way both to seek and to stay in that presence. Not for an hour on Sunday morning or Wednesday afternoon, but for as much time as we could stand. Then she goes on and says, we believe that God's home was the church, that God's people knew who they were, that the world was a barren place full of lost souls in need of all the help that they could get. Plenty of seized on those ideas because they offered us meaning, believing they gave us purpose and worth. They gave us something noble to do in the midst of life that otherwise would be invisible. Plus, there are large swaths of the world filled with people in deep need of saving. The problem is, many of the people in need of saving are in the churches. And not leaving part of what they need saving from, the idea that God sees the world the same way they do. What if the gravel part of the parking lot looks more promising to God than does the floorboards of the church? What if lost souls strike God as more reachable than lifelong believers? What if God can drop a ladder absolutely anywhere God wants to, with no regard for religious standards developed by those who made it their business to know the way of God? What do you think of that?
That's great.
Love it.
Wow.
So she's talking about the whole world opening up. And one of my questions was, do you believe there are some places in this world that are thinner than others? That the membrane between God and us is so thin in that place that it's a place where we, like Jacob, might wake up.
Hmm. Are you asking us? I have one.
Okay,
I was in the Northwest Territories or Yukon, I don't remember. Paddling, you know? And I looked up and there was this cross with a little fence around it. It wasn't painted, it was just wood. And it was a grave. And I remember, and I still remember it, I still think of it. I don't know why. Well, I've arranged in my mind why, but, and so I kept paddling. And I kept looking back for at least, I don't know, it was a stretch of the river or a straight. Until I couldn't see it anymore, probably a turn.
wow.
That was 1970.
Did it-
Nixon had just been booted.
You see Nixon in that grave? I mean, what did that mean to you? Experience? What was
Well,
it?
it's something
Did it
to
touch
do
your
with
emotions?
humanity and we're all in it. But it was also awe for that person in the grave. Of course, he was Indian.
Right,
It was an Indian grave, so,
oh, it's a Native American grave.
yeah, because of the fence and the way it was.
Right. Was that a thin place for you, you think?
Was it what?
A thin place? Was it a thin place where the spirit and God meet?
I felt something that I was so compelling. That's all I know. I didn't think of God exactly, but I thought of some sort of feeling of oneness.
Oh.
I've had that.
Okay.
Actually, I had a similar experience we went on Beaver Island, near Beaver Island, there's another island called Garden Island, which has been, all those islands have been inhabited by the Indians, but on Garden Island, they have their burial place, which they still use. And we went over there one time to that and we walked in, it's like their cemetery, and we walked through it, and I can still feel
Yeah,
I don't know, it's hard to even describe what it is, but those spirits were there and you could feel it. It was palpable. Unbelievable.
When you say they, do you mean First Nations people?
First Nations people. I'm sorry, probably should have used that, yeah.
That's interesting, we were in Mesa Verde, and we went the early tour, which was the long tour, and we didn't realize it, we struck gold because we had the Native American guide. It was a descendant.
Southwest Colorado, the Mesa Verde.
Mesa Verde, yes.
The cliff dwellers. I mean,
We climbed down this cliff, Phyllis, and he said, you're lucky to come here because we have real mixed feelings about bringing people into these places because our spirits still live here.
Right.
Our ancestors are here and you can feel it.
You could feel it, yeah.
thousands
So
of years.
that experience of yours was what he was describing, the meaning for the sacredness of, this was for him a sacred space. Oh, anyway, yeah.
But I think Jacob's, I mean, when she writes there, Jacob woke while God's breath was still stirring in the air. I think as long as you're open to it, it doesn't have to be these special places. It's a matter of not being distracted, but being always, as much as you can be open to it, it's there everywhere you look.
So maybe it's not just certain thin places. It is, as that quote I said, that she had, that the world is God's sanctuary.
Right? You're walking and it's around you all the time.
Beautifully written.
And
Or
then,
the sound of silence, she says, like if there's something to listen, there's somebody here, somebody to experience, he's stirring the air actively.
We have somebody.
Did somebody at home say something? I'm sorry, please speak up.
I just wanted to say that there are people who have the ability to change the vibration of an area or space that you occupy, that it becomes a sacred space. This is something that very highly evolved people know how to do. I've known several. And so from my personal experience, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, as above, so below, is very real. It's just not part of our daily do.
that's right.
Have anyone been around people who seem to have that sense of awareness that they ever brought it to bear on you or on the space? Jeffrey?
Well, yes, the world is filled with spiritual teachers who, like JS is suggesting, have an aura. And it's not so much an effort, like they know how to do it, it's just who they are.
Right.
And I like JS's word evolved. I mean, some people are very highly evolved in this, and to be in their presence is to be immediately aware that, oh, there's something more to life than the ordinary
Yes.
things of life. The problem with those special teachers is we begin to revere the teacher rather than the teaching. That's the temptation
Right.
that needs to be avoided, and say, oh, I really love Father so-and-so, or, the venerable, like if it's a monk, they're usually called the venerable so-and-so. You begin to revere the person.
I hear that with Richard Rohr a lot.
Oh, yes,
Talking that
people talk about Richard Rohr.
He's not gonna be with us forever.
Richard's one of my great teachers. I read his daily devotions. They're very meaningful to me. But yes, I saw Father Richard last summer at the Parliament of the World's Religions. He's just a guy, right?
Yes.
And yet to be with him
Right.
was to be very special. But what's important is not Father Richard, it's the direction that Father Richard is pointing to.
Right.
And we need to unhook ourselves from, oh, Pastor so-and-so, we really love Pastor so-and-so. Well, what do you love about Pastor so-and-so? What about her teaching? What about her principles, her way of living have that kind of profound impact on me? It's not the person, but the teaching.
Very important.
And it's
Thank
really
you.
important for leaders to learn, the second someone's putting you on a pedestal, you should expect to be knocked down.
Yeah.
Isn't,
And
I mean, this may be
ministers-
sacrilegious, but isn't that what happened to Jesus?
Right. Oh, that's what he feared in Mark's gospel. Be silent about this.
Right.
I don't put me up there. I think it's part of it. There's probably biblical scholars could say more other reasons.
So I think Jesus was such an amazing teacher and human being that we talked about this in Spiritual Enrichment a couple of years ago. Soon after his death, he began to be revered as some kind of divine figure. And whether that was right or wrong, it's what happened.
Well, what I'm thinking about is also is when we think about, if you believe in Jesus, you're going to heaven. So it's about the belief in the man rather than the belief of the way. And you were forgetting what the teachings were and doing what he did and revering him rather than the message that he was giving you.
So that's also why in Buddhism and Christianity, we have and Islam, we have kind of saints. I mean, in Sufi Islam, there are saints, and you can go to their graves and you venerate the graves of Sufi Islam saints. If you go to Delhi today, you can visit some of these places in Iran and elsewhere. But the point is, it becomes hard to separate the teacher from the teaching. For Christians, it's almost impossible to separate the teachings of Jesus from the person of Jesus.
Even Jesus said, so the man approached Jesus, said, good teacher, and Jesus said, wait a second. I'm not good, only God is good.
Yeah, but part of this problem with Jesus is that Jesus so embodied his own teachings. So as I'm saying in my sermon today, little prelude here, preview. Jesus talked about letting go of the ego. But on Good Friday, he showed us what it really means to let go of your ego. Yeah. That's a preview to today's sermon. So it's hard to separate Jesus, the human being / divine figure, from the words of Jesus.
We so much need something in flesh.
Right.
We're a body people, so to get something, people I do retreats with, I find his writing hard to read. Bruce's words are pretty much an abstraction way of talking. He doesn't use story very much. When he does use story, when he's talking to us in person, it's powerful. But you need to see something in action.
Yeah.
And
So
emotionally.
I think when Richard Rohr dies, it's going to be a great blow to people who read his daily devotions.
Right.
And he'll be kind of elevated, won't he? From this world to the world of our imagination as a saint.
Right.
Not an official Catholic saint.
Right. So
Likewise, Gandhi, likewise, Marcus Borg for me.
Martin Luther King Jr.
So many.
Yeah.
We do need people like that, but we also need to remember that they walk the earth just like the rest of us, and that's why they are saintly.
We can look at their walk as a reflection of Jesus' walk, so we can walk and reflect something of Jesus. And we don't have to have everyone idolize us, which is a relief. I can't imagine being Richard Rohr. I mean, there's something about that. When I retired, it's a relief from having the image that people project on you for a time. You realize that's important too. That's why it's so important for us to have good ethics. We just finished that ethical training as pastors, or anyone who teaches, anytime anyone in your field, someone looks at
But
you.
maybe we
Sure.
need those saints in our head to keep us going.
And maybe just ironically to remind us not to let it devolve to hero worship. Because even though, the one person, history of everything, who was, the one time where God was here with us on earth, even he said, don't worship me, it's the word, it's the way. Because I've been, in a big room where other people got really close to the Dalai Lama and said they felt it, like their body was vibrating because they were close to him.
Yeah.
I got once at a reception, I got to shake hands with Martin Marty.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I've read a lot of his stuff. It's actually him. And now I can read things from his son. And Andrew's
Comment.
So, it's interesting the analogy that we're making here, being from where I'm from and how religion is. If a Christian, so-called charismatic from Africa or Ghana, listens to this conversation, we will be so off the chart.
Right.
They everything is based on religion in Africa, and people are taking advantage. People who are supposed to be directing, pointing to the Christianity where it needs to be, they take advantage. They be put on a pedestal, and they start asking people to come give them their money.
Oh, yeah.
So when you go to church, they raise funds for everything. But then as a church member, when I need money and I'm dining and I go to ask, he'll direct me to go and pray and wait for it to come. Yes. So the dimension that we have here, learning that we need to separate the individual from the teachings and,
Right.
it baffles me when I go to Ghana and I get
Right.
engaged in conversations with, I mean, you become something else. Who are you to challenge our,
Right.
you know?
And,
So-
oh, it must be difficult for you.
Yes,
And to hear it, because there are leaders in Africa we now know about, we hear about, they're famous beyond Africa now, because they've gathered so much power and so much wealth. And people want to hear that
Mhm.
success gospel.
yes.
They're just hungry for knowing that because they're in pain, they want it to happen to them, what happened to you, right?
There's somebody that died not long ago. He was big in Nigeria. People traveled to the church. And apparently the evil that he did underneath what? I mean, now after his death is when it's being revealed. People, but you who experience that is saying it, they
Right.
will tell you are evil for exposing him.
Oh.
Yes, and I
Oh, yeah.
mean, it's.
Well, we've had a lot of that in our country too, with some of these big mega churches.
Yes.
Remember Tammy and Baker?
I guarantee you millions off of their spirituality, no, it was all for that cult of personality,
Yeah.
it's the same everywhere, they look different, but they're.
If someone heard this and comes across our website, and here's our conversation now, and we could have comments, we don't do the comment thing. Oh, my goodness, I mean, we would hear,
Oh, yes.
we need a thrashing from some people about this, and say we're of the devil, because it is true. That we struggle with this is the whole idea of, they're still charismatic though, there are charismatic personalities that take hold. And
That's
they
good.
can, yeah,
Right.
so,
Somebody, years from now, who's watching us, a recorded version on YouTube, bring it on.
One of the things I've been thinking about this morning, may be totally irrelevant, but I think it's also related, is I read the story this morning about Navalny. Who was just died yesterday in the penal institution in Russia, but somebody asked him why he went back to Russia after surviving. And he said, I had to go because I had to live my beliefs. I had to, and I mean, it struck me, it was like Jesus, knowing he was going to the cross, he had to do it out of his beliefs.
But he didn't have to go back, he knew he was gonna be killed.
He knew he was gonna be killed.
So his message is more important than him.
Right.
Right, the message, and it's the same with Jesus, it's exactly the same thing in some ways.
that's the way that.
And he's not, I mean, we're not even talking about a Christian, we're talking about a man who's going to a country that is supposedly not very religious. I mean, they dismiss all the religion for years and years and years and years, but yet he is adamant about having this vision that he has to be truthful to himself.
People are already saying, I'm sorry, it's not even at 48 hours, he's stronger now than he's dead.
Exactly.
Yes, and
This-
400 people have been arrested because they have been giving him
Flowers.
giving flowers.
Right,
and
right.
So it's sort of related to that fact that we have to have that kind of saint in our head
Yeah,
to
yeah,
move us, to keep us on the way, maybe.
Sorry for the
Yeah,
democracy.
I'm so glad you said that, because it brings us right to the very truth of what it is all about.
Right. What's the truth is, yeah.
One thing I want to emphasize as we're talking about this is we spend a lot of time in spiritual enrichment reading the wise words of other people. Yet we possess wisdom too.
Mhm.
right.
And I wouldn't want anybody in this group to underestimate or undervalue their own inherent wisdom
Yeah,
Thank you, JS.
that's a very good point, yes.
and be proud, not proud, but to affirm your wisdom in sharing it.
Right,
No.
and
I'm
I
not
think,
I'm not against reading the works of other wise people. But what does that mean for you individually as you develop and cultivate your own wisdom.
Well,
Hey,
just,
JS, I think that Barbara Bug Taylor is saying exactly that. I think that's
Yes,
her.
I do too.
Yeah.
Sure, these paragraphs have obviously stirred up a lot of great ideas and just how it's meant to all of us. I couldn't tell you, we're talking about other people and avoiding cults of personality, but where does it start? Being alone. And she made me think about sometimes just going on a hike, you know, just being by myself and then looking down in this beautiful valley or a mountain stream, all by myself, don't hear anything, but feeling I'm not alone at all.
Not being distracted by the world.
the interesting thing here, the next chapter, the reason I said I think it's important to read the second chapter as well is because it's really putting into practice the first chapter, because she's talking about paying attention. The discipline of paying attention, not just to nature. I think she would say dreams. She raises the question, do you believe dreams sometimes are given to us or happen to us as a way of communicating some message, but also relationships? Because somehow experiences we have with other people, maybe working something through with someone else, are transformative to us. And we hopefully have that experience with our significant others, because they can become to us, and that relationship can be transformative, an opportunity to grow in faith and grow closer to God, because there are times where it will certainly make you pray.
That's the name of the chapter, the practice of paying attention.
Yeah.
Subtitle of the
So-
word reverence.
Reverence, because reverence is major in my theology, because I see the essence of the Christian life is learning first to reverence God or a higher power, and for me it's God. The mystery, however you want to title that, because I think if you have reverence and realize you're not the final authority, there's one above you. You get to be human. And being fully human is the essence of my goal, not to be God. And to have reverence for God is to say, I don't report. Life doesn't report to me, I report to God. There is some greater thing that also, and this is the way we ought to choose our political leaders, by the way. Right? Does that person have reverence for anything about him or her? I mean, I'm serious about that. And some don't. And I think probably all of them struggle with it because they have such power. But if you have reverence for God, then you learn to have reverence for God created, and you see everything, as we've been saying, as a place where God can speak to us, including the people, including our enemies. So this whole idea of reverence to me it comes from a guy named Schleiermacher. He was a liberal theologian in the early 1900s, and I studied him a bit. Found him hard. He's philosophical again, so it's kind of hard to get to it. And I had to write a paper on him in a class for PhDs. I shouldn't have been in here. It's difficult, but he was so rich because the essence of life is reverence. The essence of the Christian life is reverence, and that's the same thing we're talking about these leaders in some of these churches. They want you to reverence them. They talk about God as if that's what they're pointing to, but it comes back to them that they want. It's egotism. So we're kind of dovetailing again, Jeffrey and I, not planning on it, between what's happening in this session and what he's doing there in worship. So what about dreams? Have you had dreams you felt like were revelatory?
Yes,
Do you mind sharing them, or the essence of them?
they never make that much sense that I can get to that point. I try.
But you sense that something was working in the
Yes.
back of your mind that you didn't know
Yes.
was working. And
Try as I can. I cannot remember them. Yes.
Say the way to do is keep a pen and a pad beside you and write them down.
I think they can happen in most mundane experiences of your life, but particularly kind of when you're by yourself. I think you need to have that time where you reflect, you can be reflective.
Right,
I had one like that the other day when I was brushing my teeth.
really. Yeah, so it
Even
was a
my
moment,
cat has dreams.
excuse me?
Oh,
Even
yeah.
my cat has
That's right.
dreams, because he'll sit on the lap, and you could see by his movement that he's living a dream.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. Yeah. When I was going through, my divorce, I'll share this if you won't, if you're okay with this. I was going through my divorce and it was extraordinarily painful for years. I never thought I would go through it and, you know, it's just blew me out of the water. And it was a spiritual awakening for me in some ways too. It ended up being a very, in all the pain, it was a gift, that keeps on giving. But I remember having a dream where there was a rectangular room with steps all the way around it, and I went down into it, and there were holy people there. And I was asked to take off my robe, my clothes. Like baptism, I talked about, when people were being baptized. And it was a very vulnerable feeling to do that. But that's what the experience of going through a divorce, especially as a pastor, was like for me. And I took off the clothes and a nun-like figure put on a white robe in that dream. And that was powerful for me. It was to say, something new is being born in you. Not that I was in some lofty place, but in Jungian psychology, when you descend down, you're going into the unconscious. Yeah, so whenever you dream about going into the basement, oftentimes you're going into, or you go into water, you're going into something, it's a baptismal thing, something is dying in you. And clothing images the self in Jungian psychology. So, that said, there's something new is happening to me that needs to happen. It was a gift of grace because it certainly, I thought, I wanted things to go back the way they had been. But they would not go there. It was not gonna happen. And something in me had to die. And it does in divorce. Something has to die in you. And hopefully it's not the good ego self. Hopefully it's that part of yourself that needs to get out of itself. When we go through that.
Richard Rohr talks about that a lot. You have to die in order to die to some parts of you, die to your ego in order to
Live.
Well, Jesus.
The rebirth.
I have a dream I remember, so I won't tell you the dream. But I expressed the dream over coffee to a man who I knew was part of a dream.
Right.
And you know what he did? He walked out of the room.
What
What happened?
Well, I can't tell you because it's a little off color. Well, it was obvious to him, the symbolism of my dream, and he had it. He left. He walked out of the room.
Oh, was he scared by it, you think? Or just somehow?
He knew what I was getting at, but I wasn't too aware of it.
Oh, okay.
You see,
Yeah, he scared you. Some level, he didn't.
something that was in his wiring, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a book vulnerable to share about a dream. I've done this enough with that story before, which has been helpful to people. I didn't mind sharing it, but it is vulnerable when you share your dreams because there's something about, it's far enough past too, where it is friendly. So it's powerful for me.
I had a dream, it just occurred to me, I had a dream, I had a relationship with a man that I met during college, during my, in graduate school. And he was married, and there was never a romantic relationship with him, but he always kept in touch with me. We just had a connection. He was a therapist and I was a therapist. We were both in the psychology area. he was always there when I had a problem. He was, and he was one of the kind of people that when he died, he was there for everybody. And I had this dream that I told him I really loved him. And it prompted me, before he died, to tell him that.
Wow.
And I think it was very meaningful for him. He understood what I was saying to him. It was a platonic love. He was like a brother to me. He was probably closer to any brother that I could have ever had. He was always there, and always there for John too, if we had any issues with the family or whatever. And so it led me to do something that I probably wouldn't have done.
But it's powerful because you took in something of that relationship into yourself. You know, it's like self-psychology, which is what I trained in. Self-psychology believes that the relationship and the interaction, the positive interaction, the reframings, the moments of compassion, the moments of being able to be fully yourself, that relationship with the therapist you take within yourself, and that becomes part of who you are. And heritage, you learn to do that for yourself is the idea. And I think maybe that's what we do sometimes with those spiritual people that we look up to. And it's what we do with Jesus, hopefully. We take in that love and that interaction into ourselves. And it becomes healthier, it builds a healthier ego.